Let's talk about hunger versus habit. Now, I'm sure that if you're in a calorie deficit right now, or you have been in a calorie deficit in the past, you will have experienced some form of hunger. Whether it's just a light tinge of hunger that kind of doesn't really bother you too much, or the level of hunger that kind of turns you into a manic, crazed beast that is trying to kill and murder everybody in sight who is consuming more food than you are. There are these two ends of the spectrum. Now, when it comes to hunger, I've no doubt whatsoever that you feel and experience a genuine amount of hunger when you're on any form of calorie deficit. Whatever diet it is you're following, you will experience some form of hunger. That's natural. Your body doesn't necessarily want to lose body fat, so it initiates these processes which makes you feel hungry, is trying to get you to eat, and therefore that's what you're battling against. You're battling against your body's want to cling on to your body fat. That's what it wants. Now, there are times where I feel in personal experience that sometimes the hunger isn't quite as bad as you may think. Sometimes it is, and you need to eat and you want to honor that hunger, and that's cool. But sometimes we get stuck into habits, ways of eating, times of eating, that almost if we then skip that or adjust that, we think we're hungry because we're expecting, we've come into this sort of almost automaton droid-like state where we always eat at 9, at 11:30, at 1:30, and all these different sorts of things that then kind of that just becomes a habit. So are there ways in which you can combat that and figure out where actually you sit on that spectrum at each time you may think you feel hungry? So we talked about meal timing there. Now, I feel like there's a very distinct meal timing pattern that you could be following that is beneficial to you. Now, I'm not saying that there's a specific meal timing strategy that is optimal and all of that sort of stuff. That just doesn't exist. But you may find that there is an optimal amount of meals or a frequency or a timing that just works for you when you're in a calorie deficit, whether that's slightly leaning towards some sort of intermittent fasting approach or whether it's just a normal kind of every few hours you are eating, or whether it's 3 square meals a day. Whatever it is that there's going to be that sort of meal timing approach that works for you. And once it does start to work for you, that's what you keep repeating. Now, there is some logic to that. I think that people who follow some form of regular-ish meal timing, meal pattern, whatever it is, have consistency. And that consistency helps with sticking to a calorie deficit, help managing hunger, and all of those various different sorts of things. So you get sort of into this rhythm and into this role of adopting a meal timing strategy that works for you. And that's absolutely great. It can help you manage that hunger, help you stick to your calorie deficit, all good. But then what happens is sometimes you get this deviation away from that plan, which you're finding is really, really working for you. Now, when you start to make a deviation from that plan, it's a bit like when you drop into that calorie deficit for the first time. Always those 1 to 2 weeks of you adjusting to lower calories always seems like it's that little bit more challenging. You feel a little bit more hungry when you first dive into that calorie deficit because, let's face it, you're used to eating so much more and now you've just cut that by a distinct percentage that then, okay, you're expecting to eat more. You're always expecting maybe you have this snack at this time or whatever it is that you consciously now cut those calories and therefore you start to miss them. Now, if you deviate from your meal timing strategy, again, that's no issue. You can still lose weight, you can still lose body fat. It's not magic, but it might cause you to have this thing of, okay, I'm usually eating at this time, so I'm not now, so I feel a little bit hungry. I can feel my tummy rumbling, so therefore I'm hungry. And it's almost like you've got to be able to try and differentiate between just a minor stomach rumble because maybe you've not eaten to your normal habitual times, and also a genuine call of hunger, which obviously you want to try and combat. Now, there also might be a situation where you're snacking throughout the day. If you are a grazer, let's say, you are kind of like, not wishing to say you look like a sheep, but a sheep in the field just munching on the grass all day long. You're just sat at your office, you're just munching on food all day long. albeit you may still be within your calorie deficit target, still losing weight, still losing body fat because meal timing doesn't matter that much. That's all cool. But again, you might not be there for honoring true hunger. You might just be in this kind of rhythm of just eating and eating and eating and eating and scoffing stuff down your face. Again, if you're in a deficit, that's all cool. But it might not necessarily be helping you in terms of really understanding what is a true hunger cue. And that's what we want to talk about in this particular episode of the show, is talking about where are those hunger cues. Now, I'm not necessarily going to talk about intuitive eating, because intuitive eating is a weight neutral approach. So it has some fantastic elements to it, but in terms of weight loss, it is not a weight loss strategy. Intuitive eating in and of itself, the way it's constructed, is to think about things as being weight neutral. So just remember that. Now, you can have then these different sorts of variations to your diet that cause you to have these kind of feelings of hunger. Now, things that I've used in the past, different tactics I've used with clients. Now, one would be to use the option of a 36-hour fast. Now, there's no real specific scientific research behind this, but in terms of seeing it work in the real world, I feel like it does have some use. Now, you might sit there and think, fuck, a 36-hour fast, that sounds like an absolute ball ache. But when you break it down, it's not actually that bad. Now, if you stopped eating at like 8 p.m. one evening, then obviously you've got a period of fasting while you're asleep. Then roughly speaking, you're going to have the next day is going to be where you're fasting. So you can still probably have like black coffee, water, chewing gum, stuff like that, sugar-free obviously. And then you would then fast again through the night. And then basically by the time you woke up the following day is that you would have completed your 36-hour fast. Now, why is this actually a good thing to try and do? Now, what happens here is not really going to affect anything in terms of you're not going to lose a bunch of muscle. You're not going to go into starvation mode or anything like that. It's just a short-term period of fasting, which is going to help you kind of reconnect with what actually true hunger means. You are going to reconnect with, okay, now, let's say, for example, you're 24 hours into this fast and you are now experiencing actually what hunger is, but you're kind of persevering with this approach so that you come out the other side, you have those feelings, you understand, so that when you go into your normal habitual diet and you kind of just feel like, oh, stomach's rumbling, well, actually, maybe that's not true hunger. Maybe I'm just eating out of habit. And therefore, you can start to understand more about how your body works, how about your hunger cues work, so that when you get into a stage where you're not dieting and maybe you do opt for an intuitive eating approach, which is weight neutral, you want to maintain the results that you've got, then absolutely, now you might be more in tune with what actual hunger is. Because the danger of going down an intuitive eating approach when you're trying to lose weight, it's not a weight loss diet. It's not a weight loss protocol. It has like a specific set of guidelines. I think there's 10 guidelines that you would follow, and that makes up intuitive eating. It's not just a concept of, oh, well, I feel hungry and I intuitively want a pizza. That's not really how it works. It's been misconstrued many, many times. So if you do wanted to go down that approach, then that 36-hour fast would be useful. Obviously, if you dive into a calorie deficit and you're at this stage where you've not really got much control over food, maybe you've even got a poor relationship with food, in which case you could argue maybe you don't really want to be going down the route of a diet anyway. But that aside, if you go down this route of just saying, well, I'm just going to eat intuitively when hunger calls. Now, if you're not really understanding too much about what is a true hunger call and things like that, and how do you actually fill yourself up without consuming a boatload of calories, then you can kind of get into messy waters. So think about it from that perspective. Now, the other thing would be to stop and think. That would be another strategy you could use to say, well, ask yourself, am I really hungry? Challenge yourself to say, am I really hungry at this point? Stop. You could say it out loud if you really wanted to, or maybe just say it in your head, is that I feel like now I'm habitually going to go and snack on something because I've heard my stomach rumbling, or I normally eat at 3 p.m. It's now 4 o'clock. I've missed that. I feel hungry. Ask yourself, do I genuinely feel hungry? Do I genuinely feel like eating something, and whatever it may be? Do I feel like eating this chocolate bar or this piece of fruit or whatever is going to satisfy a genuine hunger? Or am I just eating it because I normally eat at this time? And having that sort of approach could help you manage that hunger and understand whether you are in this sort of habit versus hunger mode. So if that hunger persists, then you can always opt for the most filling option that you can find. And that might be bringing in like 100, 200 grams of strawberries, which is a lot of freaking strawberries, and marry that with a glass of water. It doesn't have to be strawberries, obviously it could be anything, but you get the point, is that if you have this sort of feeling of hunger, which could be a habit thing, then opt for this low calorie option, quite filling, quite satisfying, and see if then the hunger disappears. And if it does, cool, your quid's in. But I think you should always think about what is true hunger and what does that mean for you? Is it a case of, you're just gone into a calorie deficit, so the feelings are very, very different? Is it the case that you are habitually eating at certain times and you've missed one of those times? So again, you're falling into habit rather than hunger. So I think the answering and asking yourselves all of these different questions is really going to help you move forward and obviously start to manage that hunger versus habit debate.